Hi, my name is Dr. Sandhya Raman, and today we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting. Now, this is a popular approach to weight loss that's been gaining a lot of attention over the last few years. But people are curious as to whether it works, what's the best way to get started, and there's a lot of conflicting evidence out there as to whether or not this is an effective weight loss approach. So what we're going to do today is cover the science and the nuance so you can make the best science-backed decisions for yourself. So what exactly is intermittent fasting? Well, intermittent fasting isn't a diet in the traditional sense, in that it doesn't tell you what to eat or how many calories to eat, it just tells you when to eat. There are several popular approaches to intermittent fasting. One is the 16-8 approach. This is where you eat all of your calories within an 8-hour window, and then you have a 16-hour period where you don't eat anything. So this is typically achieved by extending the overnight fast. Another popular approach is the 5-2 approach. This is where you eat as normal for 5 days of the week, and then for 2 days of the week, you reduce your number of calories to 600 calories a day for men and 500 calories a day for women. There are also a host of other different approaches, such as alternate day fasting. So the beauty of this approach is actually its simplicity. Most people don't want to be counting calories or excluding certain foods in their diet. And what's so beautiful about this approach is it just tells you when to eat, not what to eat. That said, you're likely to get far greater gains both in terms of weight loss and in health outcomes if you stick to healthy, nutrient-dense foods in those periods that you are eating. So how does intermittent fasting actually work in terms of weight loss? There seem to be several ways in which intermittent fasting works for weight loss. I've done a slightly deeper dive into this in a separate video, so have a look at that if you want to go into slightly greater depth. One of the main mechanisms by which intermittent fasting works is it works in tandem with our natural day and night rhythms. Firstly, many of the hormones in our bodies are designed to be released in a predictory fashion depending on what they assume we'll be doing at different times of the day. So this means that our digestion hormones are actually linked to what is known as our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm predicts which hormones we're going to be needing for sleeping, digestion, appetite suppression, metabolism over a 24-hour period. It's also influenced by triggers from our environment, for example, daylight and if we've just eaten. By eating within a fixed window of time, we can link up with the release of these hormones. So one really key way in which this time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting works is that it works with our appetite suppression hormones, meaning that if we eat in a fixed window, we're less likely to be hungry. Another key way in which time-restricted eating results in weight loss is that if you're eating fewer meals in the day, you tend overall to eat fewer calories overall in the course of the day. Fewer meals tends to mean fewer calories. Studies seem to suggest that simply by eating in a time-restricted pattern, people typically tend to consume between 200 to 500 fewer calories a day. Finally, after a certain period of fasting, we switch to using our stored energy, firstly in the form of glycogen, which is our stored form of glucose. After about 12 hours of fasting, we've depleted our glycogen stores and we switch to using fat as a fuel source, and we start to break down fat in our body. And it's a key mechanism by which we break down fat in order to lose weight. So why do studies have conflicting results on the effectiveness of time-restricted eating, or intermittent fasting as it's otherwise known? The main reason that the different studies have different results is that they have different designs, and these differences in their design make a big difference to their outcomes. So for example, some of the studies will use people that have no health issues. Others will use people who, for example, may have a degree of insulin resistance, such as being pre-diabetic or diabetic. Some of the studies include calorie restriction as well as time-restricted eating. Others only include time-restricted eating. Some of the studies used an early time-restricted window of eating. Others used a late time-restricted eating window. All of these differences have a huge impact on the outcome of these studies, because what we're seeing is there seems to be a better and a less good way of adopting a time-restricted eating pattern. So which approach to intermittent fasting is the most effective? What is emerging is that the best way to adopt a time-restricted eating pattern is to eat earlier in the day and stop earlier in the day, rather than, for example, skipping breakfast and pushing your dinner later on into the evening. I go into greater depth on this on my other video looking at the studies. It's only 10 minutes long, so have a look at it if you're interested. But essentially, this early pattern of eating works better with our hunger and satiety hormones, our metabolism and our digestion. So it has a greater impact on our weight loss goals. It's also really critical to remember that the quality of the food that you eat during your eating window is nutrient dense and fiber dense, so that you are really satisfied with that food and you get the best possible weight loss and health outcomes. So ideally try and meal plan and potentially meal prep so that you're eating proactively rather than reactively when you're really, really hungry. So what are the benefits beyond weight loss? Whilst intermittent fasting certainly seems to have some good evidence for promoting weight loss, it seems to have other health benefits too. For example, it seems to improve insulin sensitivity, markers of inflammation, our blood pressure, show improvements in our gut microbiome, and there even seems to be a role in a process called autophagy, which is where we recycle and repurpose cellular components, and that process seems to be key in processes for anti-aging and longevity. Some of the biggest benefits seem to be in people who have some level of insulin resistance, for example, people with diabetes, pre-diabetes, or something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, otherwise known as PCOS. There are also some interesting studies emerging about intermittent fasting and brain health, but these findings are still early and more research is needed. Are there any risks associated with intermittent fasting? Like with any significant lifestyle change, it's really important to consider the risks. In general, the most common side effects associated with time-restricted eating are hunger, nausea, fatigue, and stomach aches. In general, these tend to be mild and transient. However, if they become significant, this may not be an approach for you. One study that received a lot of attention linked an 8-hour eating window to a 91% increased risk of cardiovascular mortality in people with pre-existing cardiovascular disease or cancer. The study included over 20,000 US citizens, and it was a type of study called a prospective cohort trial. This is where you enroll people and you follow them up over a number of years, and you periodically take health data from them. In this case, the participants were followed up for an average of 8 years and up to 17 years. Whilst immediately this may seem contradictory to all that I've already said about time-restricted eating and its potential benefits, there may be some good explanations for why this finding happened. One is that they didn't actually look at the quality of their diets or their other health behaviors that may have explained these adverse outcomes. Secondly, they relied on self-reported data, which isn't always that reliable. And thirdly, they categorized them by 2 days over that entire follow-up period. So this may not actually have been how they habitually eat it. It may incidentally have been how they ate during those 2 days of gathering health data. Finally, it's really important to note that time-restricted eating may not be a good approach for certain groups. For example, people who've had previous eating disorders, and we don't really have much research on time-restricted eating in type 1 diabetics, in pregnancy. So these groups may want to avoid this approach. That's why it's really important to personalize your routine and speak to your healthcare professional if you have any significant health issues. So what's the best way to get started with intermittent fasting? I would suggest you start slowly. So for example, start with a 12-hour eating window and a 12-hour fasting window, and then slowly build up that fasting window by perhaps half an hour a week. So eventually you get to a point where you're able to eat within an 8 to 10 hour window. This seems to be the most sustainable over a longer period of time for most people, according to the studies. Remember to stay hydrated, and again, as I mentioned, try and be proactive about the meals you're going to have. So for example, plan your meals and prep your meals. Keep healthy snacks on hand so that when you are eating, you're more likely to be eating nutrient-dense and fiber-rich foods, and that's going to help you sustain a time-restricted eating pattern and give you the best possible weight loss and health outcomes. Does increasing your fasting window give you greater benefits? Well, no, not really. Firstly, you should really be aiming for what you can sustain over the longest period of time. And what the study suggests is that a 10-hour eating window seems to be the most manageable for most people. Secondly, if you make your eating window too narrow, it may become hard to eat the number of calories you need and the nutrients you need to stay healthy. Now, if you restrict your calories too much, you start to switch to preserving energy, and that will make it harder and harder and harder for you to lose weight on a certain number of calories that you used to be able to lose weight on. And you may even gain weight on the number of calories that used to be enough for you to maintain a certain weight. So this is certainly not what I would recommend at all. So in summary, time-restricted eating certainly can be a useful tool in your weight loss journey. My top tips are: 1, try and stick to an early time-restricted eating window. Wait at least an hour before your first meal of the day, before your first calories of the day. This seems to work better with our hormones that optimize our metabolism and our digestion. Have your final calories of the day at least 4 hours before you plan to be asleep. By then you should have finished digesting that food so it won't interrupt your sleep. Try to meal plan and meal prep so that you're eating healthily during your eating window. And sometimes it can be really, really useful to enlist another buddy to keep you accountable, to give you inspiration and keep you on track. Ultimately, it's really important to see what works for you, your lifestyle, your physiology, and if you have any pre-existing health conditions, please do speak to your healthcare professional first before embarking on any significant lifestyle change such as this one. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.